Okay. Hey guys, it's Josh Matthews. Welcome to Joshforce, and today is going to be super fun. We're going to talk about questions and answers. I get a lot of questions, and this is a fun little format that I can barrel through a bunch of these things, and I hope that it's going to provide a lot of value to you. Some of them are kind of interesting. Some of the questions are a little bit odd. It's like, why would you even ask that? So stay tuned. We're going to dig right into this. I'm actually just going to go ahead and get started. Okay, let's go. Questions and answers. Number one, should you tell your manager if you feel really anxious about impending layoffs within the company? And the answer is probably not. You know, we don't want to appear as though we're fishing for information or trying to soothe ourselves by understanding what's going to happen down the line. The very best thing that we can do with our managers, if we're going to ask them anything or share anything, is our willingness to do absolutely everything necessary to ensure that the team, the department, the division, the company is successful. And by the way, what can I do to help? Is there anything that I could do to make sure that we're surviving this COVID thing together? I want to contribute. People who are really confident about the work that they do tend not to feel that anyway. They might feel it, but they tend to already know that that's not something that you're going to ask. Let's jump into number two. Oh, I love this one. Why do companies hire horrible managers that have no idea what they're doing? It happens. It doesn't happen everywhere, but it does happen. Okay, four-part answer. Number one, weak candidate attraction practices. They just don't know how to attract the very best candidates out there. Number two, they have insane amount of pressure to hire quickly, right? We got to get this filled. We got to get this rec filled. We need someone in that job. Like, let's go. Oh, and by the way, if you don't fill this position, we've got another rec in a different division, in a different city, and we're going to give them that requisition. So a lot of pressure to hire quickly. A lot of people make mistakes when we move too fast. Remember, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Okay, antiquated interviewing techniques that rely on gut feel and other disproven methods of decision making. This is probably the number one crappy thing that happens in interviewing today, is being crappy at interviewing and not knowing really how to do it. Thinking that, you know, having a lot of confidence because you've done it so many times, and probably you've learned how to interview from someone else who learned how to interview from someone else. You sat in, or you went out and maybe you had 15, 20, 30 interviews in your lifetime, and you pulled all of your techniques from these situations. That said, chances are if you're getting interviewed by a recruiter, they probably had less than 5 years of experience in professional life at all. If you're getting interviewed by other professionals, my guess is that they never actually had any kind of formal training on how to conduct a successful and reliable interview practice. So that's the deal, right? Bad interviewing. And the last thing is probably just tight budget constraints and lack of training. So both are terrible excuses. Excuse says it's just one word, it's not two. But yeah, sometimes they just can't afford someone who is truly competent. And if they're strapped for money, they're often strapped for time, which means they can't invest in best practices and training people to do an awesome job. All right, this is an interesting one. Because of COVID-19, I now have to do recruiting for my company. Does it matter to hire a recruiter with Salesforce experience or a recruiter with no Salesforce experience? You know, the question's a weird one because they did just say that they have to do the recruiting, and now they're talking about going and getting a recruiter. So let's not call that recruiting. Let's just call that project management or something like that, or oversight. Look, you wouldn't go to Burger King for Chinese food, would you? Always hire a niche recruiter if possible. They'll be much more connected to the very best candidates and be able to more effectively screen them as well. This saves time, this saves money, and it protects the investment in the candidate. And probably more than anything, it saves heartache. How long does it take to usually put together a formal offer letter after sending out an email to offer the position? Like, I've seen it take a couple of hours. I've seen it take as long as 10 days. Usually it's 2 or 3 days. Sometimes if someone's not actually working, they'll give them the verbal offer, they'll tell them when to show up, and they'll sign all the paperwork then. I like this one. Recently I'd attended an interview, and the interview went smoothly over a full hour. Is that a good sign I will get the job? And in my experience, it means absolutely nothing. It just doesn't mean anything. In fact, I was talking to a good friend of mine, a highly successful recruiter in the hospitality space. Poor him, because it's a terrible market for them right now. But what we both agreed on is often people come out of interviews, and if they're like, oh man, I killed it, I nailed it, like that was awesome, it usually means that they didn't do that great. And here's why. Here's the secret why. they're so confident that they did well because they got to say everything that they wanted to say. That's not the same as connecting with the person who's interviewing. That's just saying, hey, I've prepared all this information and now I had a chance to go ahead and say everything, but not necessarily tailor it. Typically, people who think that they did really well spoke for a long time, but said very little in that amount of time. So be wary of it. It's just something to think about. Okay. What would the manager and HR think of me if I asked them in an interview, what was the staff turnover rate at this company, specifically with this manager over the last 3 years? And what did the people say was their number one reason for leaving in their exit interview? Okay, awesome question, but I don't know if I would go ahead and straight up ask that. First, you don't want to ask confidential exit interview information unless you either want to totally put them off or get lied to, which will happen. Right? They're not going to tell you the truth. HR probably can't even disclose some of that information to the actual hiring manager. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But usually for them to get the valuable information that they want from an exit interview, they're going to tell them, hey, just so you know, this is between us and it's just for our records and none of this will get back to your manager. So that's not a really good question. The question that I like the most is 3 months from now, what will I wish I'd asked you today, right? What will I wish I'd known about today before making a decision to join your company? It's probably a little bit of a better question. It's a softer question. Now you can ask specifically about staff turnover to HR or to the hiring manager, but God forbid, if it's your first interview, that's not how you make friends, so I probably wouldn't do that. Now if you're super awesome and you're a badass architect and everybody wants you and you're really interviewing them and they're not interviewing you, I would say, well, you still have probably a diva problem and I still wouldn't do it. I don't think it's friendly. I don't think it's the way to develop rapport with the people that you'll be working with, but it's a fair question. So if you get to the offer stage, go ahead and ask that, right? Or ask then. That's what I would do. Oh my God, I'm getting hot out here. It's so beautiful and sunny. It's like 87 degrees in Portland. Okay, what is the purpose of the technical whiteboard interview? If you have to ask, you'll never know. All right, what is the fastest way employers have seen a candidate screw up their chances during an interview? I would just say, number one thing, I've interviewed about 8,000 people, probably more, and the number one thing that you could do wrong is really being late. You know, being late is bad. Being late and having a bullshit excuse is even worse. Or showing up and just being kind of gross and ungroomed, if you don't smell good. I always tell people, like, if you're dressing for an interview, you don't need expensive clothes. You don't need to be fancy. You don't have to put on, you know, some $70 tie on your $100 shirt. It's just not really required. I mean, maybe it's required if you're a CEO in a buttoned-up type organization, but for the most part, we're just looking for cleanliness. Like, are you clean? Is the shirt, you know, if it's a formal interview, is the shirt pressed? It doesn't have to be an expensive shirt. Are your shoes clean? They don't have to be new. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to be fancy. Do you just look like you can at least take care of yourself? I've had some very interesting interviews where people were quite odoriferous. Not good. Another common mistake, too much perfume. Too much perfume isn't going to not get you the job, but it definitely isn't going to help your chances. Just stick to the little smells that come off of your shampoo, your armpits, your deodorant. I mean, yeah, just stick to the armpit smell. You'll do fine. Next question. Are all staffing agencies national? Nope, not by a long shot. Most large staffing firms are national or even international. I've worked with those before. I've worked inside national firms. I've worked inside global firms before. However, they tend to operate in region-specific territories. So if you apply for a job in New York City, right? Let's say you apply for a Salesforce developer position in New York City, and they also have a division in Los Angeles, chances are the folks in LA aren't necessarily going to see your information unless some very specific location boxes are checked and there's absolutely nobody in Los Angeles to perform the work, which probably isn't the case. So working with national firms is almost like working with smaller regional firms. Even though you're in their system, doesn't mean that you're open, you're not visible to absolutely everybody in the company. So you might want to contact other divisions within that organization if you're open to remote or if you're open to relocation. The sizes of staffing firms are really small niche firms like mine, large niche firms which behave like the larger ones but have some quality issues. This is in my experience, because anytime you get big, it's hard to have a massive team where everyone's a top performer. It can happen, but I haven't seen it in the staffing business yet. Just haven't seen it yet. Then there are regional firms. A friend of mine, Brooks Gilly, operates 52 Limited, a wonderful creative and design staffing firm. They're based here in Oregon, but they also have locations in Seattle, and they have locations in San Francisco. So that's a regional sized firm. I'm a small niche firm, but I operate nationally. How can I remove my first round interview? Okay, whoever wrote this is absolutely speaking my language. There's nothing I would love more to do than remove first round interviews. The problem is the math, because there's always going to be a first round. So I'm going to assume, how do I remove that HR contact, hey, like, do you breathe, can you talk interview, where they're just double checking that whoever I submitted or whoever someone else submitted or whoever submitted directly isn't just going to waste the manager's time. So fair enough, those happen. Can you get rid of it? Probably not. Move on. Just talk to them for half an hour and do a good job. Okay, is Salesforce on the decline as a company? Nope. Okay, are interviews and the recruitment industry outdated? Fair enough question. I would say the methodologies and the practices utilized within recruitment and in interviews are absolutely outdated, but let's just unpack this a little bit. I wrote some stuff out, so let's just unpack this a little bit. Prior to modernity, right, modern times, we don't know everybody in the world that we might work for. It used to be you were born into a job, right? If you were a serf, you were a serf. If you were a nobleman or a noblewoman, you were a nobleman or a noblewoman. If you were a blacksmith's son, you were a blacksmith when you grew up and you apprenticed, and that's the deal. So interviewing and resumes and all of these techniques that we use in staffing and recruiting are designed to help develop some better understanding and knowledge of a stranger, right? Everyone's a stranger until we start to get to know them. So one, do I want to even get to know this stranger and talk to this stranger? That's your resume. And two, can I identify whether this is a stranger? They're still a stranger, but is this someone that I think is worthy of more discussion and more interest? And that's at least your initial interview. And through the whole interview process, of course, we are trying to identify if you are going to be highly capable of performing the work, want to do the work, be joyful to work with, et cetera, et cetera. In my practice, multiple structured interviews guarantee a better, longer lasting fit. Recruiting is a specialization. There are about 90,000 of us recruiters here in the United States. And for anyone who's been paying attention, just like jobs and technology, the more specialized we become in our fields, the greater the need to outsource and gain assistance from specialists in other fields. And in many cases, it's the only way to compete. So as long as there's freedom of career choice, and a bad hire or a critical hire can make a massive impact on a business, there will be recruiters. AI has changed that a little bit, but just like Grammarly, it's not a substitute. Grammarly is not going to write your resume for you, and you know, AI isn't going to necessarily get you a job. That's really up to you and your efforts.